All right. So, I myself am a hirumaredx. I run a YouTube channel for World of Warcraft. We do have lore series and stuff on there. So, it's really exciting to see Steve Danuser here.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to chatting with you.
Heck yeah. So, we have a limited amount of time. Should we go into the questions now?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, the first one we have over here is this is kind of a Shadowlands question. So, at the end, whatchamacallit, the jailer is talking about his death and what is to come, when he was dying and stuff. At the end of the raid, is it possible that we're going to see some more about in Dragonflight, or is that something like far off in the future?
Well, yeah. So when you think about the jailer and what he was talking about, and he talks about how the full context is a cosmos divided cannot stand against what is to come.
Yeah.
And so clearly he had something in mind that he was concerned about. And from his point of view, he was the only one who could solve it. He was the only one who could stand against whatever this is. But his reference is not the first time that we've seen speculation or discussion about potential threats that are out there. If you look at some of the stuff that Fareem writes about in his journals, he has a lot of speculation about it. There was an oracle in Zereth Mortis, Sejura, who says a few lines that talk about cosmic powers and stuff, and even dating back to, like, say, N'Zoth in around the time of BFA during 8.3 and things like that. He was talking about something coming and wanting us to be, N'Zoth wasn't talking about killing us. He wasn't talking about just wiping us out. He was talking about, like, yeah, join me, come.
Oh,
And he
I
was
thought that was
talking.
just like him, like posturing. I didn't know that was actually like a threat.
No, he was. He has. If you go back through and look at things, this was seated back in there as well. So when you have, like, multiple entities, of different backgrounds, obviously,
Yeah.
N'Zoth is of the void, and the jailer is of death. It starts, painting a pattern and of this knowledge that isn't just one person's perspective, but other entities having perspective on this too. So, we try to tell these stories in places and settings where they feel most appropriate. And, certainly in the Dragon Isles right now, the story that we're telling is one about the dragons and the aspects, and kind of them as a people. But this thread isn't something that we've forgotten about, but it'll surface again in the right setting, and as it's building towards learning more about what might be going on.
Yeah, because I just assume, like, most people think it's like the Void Lords, but if N'Zoth was the one warning about it too, it's probably not that. Would you say that is probably true?
Well, N'Zoth is the relationship between the old gods and the Void Lords is, one that is interesting and hasn't been delved into a ton so far.
Oh, really?
But it's certainly something that should we delve into the Void again in the future, which you can probably imagine that we might be. That's something that would be interesting to explore there for sure.
Okay, so what you're saying is they're not just necessarily mindless minions of the Void Lords, then?
Well, no, they definitely are not. And the thing about the Void that makes it different from the other cosmic forces, when you look at, like, the Titans, who are the epitome of order, literally the embodiment of order as a force. Mm-hmm. They have a hierarchy and a structure, and everything is very kind of rigid and planned and laid out. And the light is similar in that regard, in that there is, like, a true path that the light wants to see and it believes is the one way to do things. But the nature of the Void is one of possibilities. And part of believing in infinite possibilities is that you need to be open to changing your plans and evolving and adapting when a better option comes along. That's one of the strengths of the Void, is its adaptability. And you could also say that, like, life is an adaptable sort of force as well. As even Fel in its own way is adaptive and changing and chaotic in its nature. So it's interesting how these cosmic forces have have similarities and differences that aren't always just apparent in terms of like their intent and their, you know, whether they seem benevolent or good or not. So to answer your question, beings of the void are contentious by nature and adaptable by nature. And so if N'Zoth or the Void Lords have a strategy to begin with, they're more than willing to adapt and change as a better path to success comes along.
Okay. I think I get that. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, let's go into the next one. So, we have the alternate Azeroth timeline. That's not entirely the same as Azeroth, the one where the Murloc goes back in time and makes azmerloth. Are we going to see any more like alternate timelines in Dragonflight?
Well, that's a bit spoilery. Certainly, we've got bronze dragons, we've got infinites, as you've seen, kind of got something going on there. So I think it's a safe bet that certainly we have some storylines planned with time and those forces. Azmerloth was a special case. That's a really fun quest line, that whole series of events.
Everybody's Murlocs.
It's super fun, super flavorful. Our quest designer, Kate Bankson, who worked on that, is awesome and did a lot of fun, had a lot of fun with that. And so, time and playing with possibilities and possible realities, I think, is definitely part of the storyline. Well, not exactly the same as Azmerloth or doing riffs on that, but it's definitely fundamental to this guy that's on the screen behind me, and caring about time and what he perceives as inevitability and what others might see as only one of many possibilities. So all that stuff yet to play out.
I get it. On a related question, I'm going to jump ahead on these because we were talking about Nozdormu. So in Dragonflight, we saw the infinite Dragonflight seems to be a lot more negotiable. In the past, they have never been, which is quite the change. Does this mean we're going to have more infinite Dragonflight lore coming up? Like in the way where we might be able to actually negotiate with them instead of only just killing them?
Again, you're touching on spoilery stuff, but in like the most non-spoilerly way possible. What I would say is like the past stuff that we've seen with the infinites, sometimes it's been hard to tell exactly what their end goal was or what these different things that they were doing was leading to. Clearly they were messing with time and so forth, but it didn't always kind of fit together. And what we tried to do in their storyline in Dragonflight is they have a clear objective. They have a thing that they want to have happen. And I think that as we go forward into these stories, they will get closer and closer to having events go their way, but that they are not a monolithic entity either. We were talking about like order Lords versus void and things like that. And there's a similar philosophy of that in how they look at time. Nozdormu, being empowered by the Titans, has kind of that Aman'Thul view of things where, there must be one time stream. There must be one way that things work out and that play out, and you are the custodian of that. And that's always been the thing the way he's seen things. But the infinites have that, it's in their name. There should be infinite possibilities. There should be infinite timelines. There should be infinite ways that this can play out. And so they have been much more willing to meddle with time and its implications than the bronze dragons have been, although some of them have shown to be pretty willing to mess with things too.
Yeah, like the Dragon
Soul and some of the things that Kairos did in terms of getting from Pandaria to but not all the time and
I guess during the trial he was still technically the bronze dragons. They okayed the look back in time orb thing.
Yeah. So but these are interconnected flights like the infinites and the bronze. They obviously have a lot of common origins and things like that. So to answer your question, I think we will see some different sides of the infinites and understand that they are not a monolithic entity and they have some adaptability within them as well.
That's interesting because in the past they've always just kind of randomly done stuff, which made some very interesting dungeons and quests. But now it's actually fun to see them do something more than just like, we're going to mess with stuff just for the sake of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next question. Will we see a continuation of singular storytelling? As in no more covenant / faction / class splits of the story? Because like in Dragonflight, everybody has the same story, but like in all the previous expansions, you had to like play different things in order to get it all. Do you guys like this style, or are you going to go back to the splitting it up in future expansions?
Well, what I would say is that we try to tell the story in a way that is most befitting the kind of tale that we're telling. So, like, for BFA, for example, because that was all about these two factions fighting one another, it would be very difficult to tell one story that encapsulated both points of view, and so we tried to make it very different. But in Legion had the class flavor and different artifact lines and class order halls.
That makes
covenants sense. And Shadowlands, like you mentioned. But the thing is that regardless of how many people we have working on this and the time we have to work on any expansion, like ultimately the amount of content we make is like a pie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can decide how you want to divide that pie up. But the more you divide it up, the smaller each slice is. And there's only so much time. There's only so much, resources and a number of people and like all that sort of stuff. And so every time we make a choice to tell lots of different stories, which was really cool with like Legion and the artifacts and stuff like that, but it has a cost to it in terms of the overall quantity that any one player, unless again they play all the variations, is going to see. So with Dragonflight, it was really nice because this was a great opportunity to tell a very unified, singular story. This wasn't about dividing into factions or even not as elaborate as covenants. We still want everybody to be able to play everything, and Alliance and Horde weren't at each other's throats. So while we have some different quest text and things like that based on what faction you are or who you're talking to sometimes, we didn't have to write whole swaths of content that was distinctive. And so that ends up being like everybody gets the whole pie in Dragonflight, which is really cool. But I won't say that we won't ever if the story is fitting of having certain paths or certain pieces, we might divide the pie up again, but it's a conscious choice that we make, and we know some of the benefits and the costs to doing so.
I gotcha. Because like in the Southern Barrens, for example, in Cataclysm, you get two completely different stories depending if you're Alliance or Horde. You go through that. Mm-hmm. And that was like way before all these like splits and stuff.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's excuse me, it's definitely been done before, and it's in both large and small ways and things like that. But every time we do it, it does incur a cost to the overall pie that is getting divided up. So we just try to be mindful of that.
Yeah, because I remember in Dragonflight, I was hearing from some people, they were like, wow, there's so many more like touching story moments in Dragonflight than other expansions. And I was like, not really. It's just, since you're all seeing it all at once, you're just finally getting to see it like all at, whatchamacallit. It's not split off, because like I've already done all the stories and all the past expansions. Like it's about the same as it's always been. It's just in this one, you get to see everything instead of having to make multiple alts for it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think because you are seeing the whole picture, it does give you a broader thing and make you think there are more of this or more of that or and so forth. But the numerical quantities are probably not all that much different. But you do just get to see the whole thing at once.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. Do you remember Margrave Krexsus from Shadowlands? He was in a whole bunch of promotional material. He was in the cinematics and the loading screen. Were there any like larger storylines planned for him, or that was possibly scrapped that you might be able to talk about, or is that always just misdirection?
Well, it was neither. It wasn't either misdirection or scrapped ideas, really. Like the reality is that these expansions get developed over long periods of time, and cinematics and other supporting materials start even earlier in the process. Yeah. And so for example, we knew the zones, we knew that there were most of these figures, but like when it came to, say, the loading screen, we knew we weren't introducing the Primus until later in the expansion. And when we did, we would be showing Primus who had been changed by his captivity. He didn't look the same as he did in this kind of idealized sort of shot.
Yeah.
And so our choices were, well, we will have a statue of the Primus in the Order Hall, but you won't actually see the Primus until the next patch in. And so we can't put, is either put a statue or put some other representation of Maldraxxus on the loading screen. And Margrave Krexsus was a cool, character and model and things like that. And so the decision was made to put him in there as like, well, clearly he looks like Maldraxxus, so people will get it. And he is a powerful figure. Of course, he was not a long-lived character. Which and it would have been cool to have him around longer because he had kind of a cool backstory and a cool relationship with Draka and things like that. That you got to see in the animatic that was released. But it wasn't any kind of like, oh, we'll trick, we want to imply that there's a bigger storyline with him. No, that was basically he served the purpose that he was intended to serve.
Okay.
As kind of the embodiment of, here's the ideal of Maldraxxus and what it's supposed to be, and it's getting killed off by these dark forces that are conspiring to change Maldraxxus and how it's worked. So he kind of embodied that and then Draka picked up the torch from him and Draka's allies and the player helping to restore the Covenant Hall and so forth. Krexsus served the purpose that he was intended to.
Yeah, that's a lot more information than I would have thought about that. It's like, I just assumed, hey, he's just a stand-in because he represents the zone well. I didn't think he was actually like that more well thought out.
Yeah, we live a long time with these characters before, they end up in whatever media or the game or whatever. And so, there's a lot of thought and care and dedication that is put into these things. And so,
yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so next one. There's this red dragon sleeping in the caverns of Silphus called Andrestraz, who's been there since Pandaria, and we've yet to have any true answers as to their purpose. And in fact, there's like a Shadowlands Anima Orb toy which randomly teleports you there. So is there going to be anything... Do we know anything about this dragon? Because like the community's been wondering about it for a long time. We just assumed it's like an Easter egg, but can you like shed any light on the sleeping dragon?
And there was some questions about that, I think, a few years back, and one of the designers had looked into it and wasn't sure. There's like you said, back in Pandaria.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, so and people, whoever put it in, I don't think is with us anymore, and so whatever that original intent was, whether it was a tribute to someone's child or a friend or an employee, some of those things get kind of lost in the midst of time. So I can't tell you what the original intent was for it, other than a cool little thing that you would come across in the world. And so
kind of like the Ironforge Airport thing.
Yeah, and some of those are just meant to be fun. Somebody had some extra time, they threw a thing in.
Fun little things in the world.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So that's not to say that we won't come up with a bigger purpose for our friend Andre, but maybe it will be, and it really comes down to, does somebody have a cool idea for it or pitch or something like that, and who knows, maybe some team member who catches this interview and hears about it is like, oh, that's right, I had an idea about that dragon, and maybe something cool will happen, but we'll see.
Okay, yeah, if anything, that's a good enough confirmation. So let's go to the next one. Where exactly is Reno Jackson and Rafaam? Because they were both seen in Mechagon and Uldum, and they're both very heavily tied towards Galakron's lore and Hearthstone. And I think we even saw them in like some data mine stuff. So are there going to be anything with Reno or Rafaam?
Well, what I'd say is that remember that Hearthstone lore is not completely canon. It's its own continuity in that regard. But we do like making references to those characters, and Mechagon was one of those places where it just felt really right to do that. It was fun. Mechagon was, apart from the whole, we're going to turn you into robots and blow up stuff. It was pretty lighthearted in terms of its tone, and had a lot of opportunities for using some of those Hearthstone characters. But just because they appeared there doesn't mean that we inherited all of that Hearthstone continuity and bring it in. So like when you see our Reno Jackson, that doesn't mean he has the same dragon origin or something.
Yeah.
He can be just what he appears to be, a fun, adventurous human who does stuff. So
I assumed he would always be a dragon.
No, that we can kind of pick and choose what pieces of that. But we deliberately didn't want, for Dragonflight, that wasn't a thing that we wanted to pull into the story and make a part of the thing. And we always have to think of, when we do pull in characters like that, what attachments are they bringing in, what expectations from the audience are they bringing in. And so we want to be careful not to, what might be just a fun offhanded thing to throw in, it might cause, it might mislead someone to think there's bigger implications, or they might say, well, if that part is true, then what about this other thing from Hearthstone, and is that true or not? It might end up being more confusing than helpful. So so we're just mindful of things like that when we pull in characters. Yeah, it's great fun.
Yeah,
it's
fun,
awesome to see this stuff they do.
Yeah, they just kind of throw stuff at the wall. Okay, so that's good. That's good to know. I just assumed that was the case too. Let's go on to this next one. So we have part of the Infinite Dragon storyline where you go back in time. You go back to the Black Empire, and N'Zoth seems to recognize players while you're there. And there's been these theories going around the community about people who haven't purged the Eye of N'Zoth from BFA. Are there going to be any repercussions with that? Was that a hint at something to come in the future?
Well, N'Zoth devotees are really attached to their Eye of N'Zoth. Yeah. I know people get really, and I'm not saying we never do something with it, but I also don't want people to think that every little thing that we do is adding up to that necessarily. But it is very interesting. And again, we're very deliberate about what N'Zoth says when you go back there, what lines we chose.
But the lore theorists are going to love to hear that.
Yeah, and I actually wrote the new lines for N'Zoth that we put in, because I wanted some very specific things in there. And that doesn't mean, again, as you've seen with Il'gynoth lines, with things N'Zoth said in the past and stuff like that. Not always. Some of them are deliberately, to make you think, or, some of them are not going to lead to something. But again, that's part of the Void's perspective, is infinite possibilities. Which of these is true? Are all of them true? Are none of them true? Are some of them true? All of that stuff is part of the nature of characters who are of the Void, and certainly N'Zoth too. But it is again, it's interesting because N'Zoth does recognize you way in the past when he shouldn't, and yet what does that mean if you then did that actually happen? And then when we saw N'Zoth in Battle for Azeroth, did he have that knowledge and that memory, or is this
that's the main theory? Is
all of that stuff is interesting to think about, isn't it? And again, it's worth looking back at some of the things N'Zoth and his minions have said in the past and what they've hinted at and so forth. And it's certainly fun to put all that stuff together, and you end up with that kind of the classic Charlie meme of the lines on the board connecting to everything. I think that's a lot of fun, and it seems like there's a lot of people who have fun with that stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah, because the main theory of that is since you went back in time and you recognize you, he knows which timeline is going to happen, so we can better prepare for what's going to happen. Would you say that's accurate?
I would say that N'Zoth was very clever, and there was much written in Chronicle and things that that have been said about how N'Zoth was the weakest, and of the old gods and all that. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean his army was the weakest? Does that mean his physical form was the weakest? Mm-hmm. Certainly not his mind wasn't the weakest out of all of them, because he has shown that he is very smart, and
he's responsible for so much of Warcraft lore.
Yeah, and if he is that smart and that long thinking, and if he got some possibilities tipped to him via our messing around with time, well, that's interesting to think about and what that could mean. Yeah,
for sure. Okay, let's go on to this next one. So we have the Ethereals working in the background in the adventure journals, the Brawlers Guild, the Transmog competition, and they're all doing various things. And in Dragonflight, we're finding these random odd coins in our adventure guide from the Ethereals as well. Is this all leading up to something with ethereal lore, possibly?
Well, we like the Ethereals. They're super fun. They've been fun since they were first introduced.
Yeah,
and we do tend to use them a lot, both for story stuff, but also they fit well with some of that systemic things. Void storage, they were the ideal fit for transmogrification. There's some cool stuff there.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is that the Ethereals are very keen to keep their fingers in the cookie jar, as it were. Like, they want to, they have a knack for kind of hanging around and looking for opportunities. And after all, they're touched by, powers of the void and the nether and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so there is a certain chaoticness to them and a certain fun and unpredictability to them. And we certainly haven't seen the last of the Ethereals. But again, when the time is right, we will be we'll be seeing some fun, cool stuff with them. Maybe some perspectives we haven't seen before on the Ethereals.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, that's fair enough. Let's go on to this next one over here. So, might we see story elements in the future that players get to decide the outcome of? Say, with the Sibelian and Rathian thing, are players actually going to be able to choose the leadership? And if so, is that something you guys are experimenting with or will experiment with going down the line?
The Sibelian and Rathian stuff is meant to be flavor and what you like for your character, who you want to support. So it's not meant to be a vote. It's not, like that would, I think that would be a little bit unfair to position it as a fun flavor thing and then later say, oh, actually you were voting the whole time. And then people go, wait, I didn't know that. I didn't think I was making. So, that's
assuming it was like a vote though, or like if there's going to be one in the future.
If we stage it like
a testing the waters to see maybe we can do this in the future.
No, it wasn't. That wasn't the intent behind it. It wasn't. But I'm not saying we would never do something like that.
I think it would throw anything off the table for sure. But it wasn't the intent with this.
It wasn't the intent with this. No, but could something like that be done in the future under the right circumstances? It could be fun and cool, and that's what it has to be. Like whenever the danger is always people. When gaming the system or deliberately trying to wreck the outcome for other people and things like that. So you need to always be really careful when you in a multiplayer game, which WoW will always be, that's the core of what it is. The repercussions of, well, somebody, I wanted this choice but a bunch of other people outruled me and now that's not fun for me. Whereas in a single player game, it's great to be able to make choices because that then you get to see the repercussions of things that you wanted to see. And it works really well for that. So it would have to be a situation where it felt good and it felt like, no matter what the outcome, it's interesting and has cool, and nobody's going to get too bent out of shape if their way isn't the thing that ends up coming, being the eventual outcome. So it's a tricky situation, but again, I'm not ruling it out, but it wasn't the intent here.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, when I first read on this question, I thought the exact same thing. It's like people are just going to find a way to game the system anyway, because WoW is so min-maxing. So let's go on to the final one. It's more of a flavor one. From a lore perspective, if you had a choice, which Dragonflight would you join? Or at least which one is your favorite?
Well, that is a very tough question for me in particular because I live so closely with all of these flights. So what I would say is I'll give two answers to it because on an intellectual level, the bronze, the guy behind me, is very compelling because time is cool.
Yeah, I love the bronze Dragonflight.
Yeah, and especially when you start getting into those possibilities and potential outcomes and potential disturbances with the time stream, it's a lot of fun. And so that's my favorite from that sort of flavor. But I also have a lot of fondness for the black Dragonflight in terms of
that's my favorite.
Not when there's not necessarily when when Deathwing took over and then drove them all into kind of a dark place. But if you go back to the origins of the flight and what they represent, the Earth Warder, protectors,
like what we saw in those preview videos.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's something really cool and noble and strong about that appeals to me, and that kind of like adventurous, like, yeah, we can take this stuff on and we'll be the protectors of this place. So that's my other real favorite.
Yeah, I just like the Black Dragonflight because Wrathion's just my favorite character.
Well, yes, it's definitely hard not to love Wrathion. At least we try to make it that way.
He's great. He's never been dull. That's for sure.
I think that would be the biggest insult that you could ever say to Wrathion, was calling him dull. I think he can survive being called dangerous, or a potential falling into old god stuff. But if you call him dull, he's not going to like that at all.
Oh, there's no way. Okay. All right. So that's all the time we have for now. Thank you for answering all those questions. I'm surprised we actually got through all of them.
Well, it was a lot of fun, and I appreciate the excellent questions, and look forward to talking to you again.
Of course. Yeah, that was great.